It was not the ending, but it was an ending, for there are neither beginnings nor endings to the wheel. Wait a minute. Okay. If you've watched any of my other Cosmere videos, you know that I can't do anything without spoilers, but I did manage to be on an Easter eggs panel at Dragonsteel Nexus and not spoil any of the Wind and Truth preview chapters, so I think I can give my thoughts in a non-spoiler way before diving into the nitty-gritty of why I loved this book so much, even though I do think it is one of the weaker entries in the Cosmere overall. Side note, my Cosmere videos seem to do better when I don't do my whole full glam and my hair is on its third day out from a wash, so if you like this more casual look, please let me know. It's a lot less effort than putting on an hour's worth of stage makeup and trying to make sure that my freshly washed hair is all curled and pretty. Anyway, I digress. Where do I start with this absolute unit of a book? 1,330 pages, 62 hours. Here's the screenshot of my Audible library, sorted by length, short to long. And we're all the way at the bottom, with only War and Peace breaking up the Stormlight Archive. Staying spoiler-free, this is not a masterpiece of a book, and that's okay. I can love something while acknowledging its flaws, and I think that maybe people were expecting something different from this book. It's the midpoint of a 10-book series. We were not going to get definitive conclusions about anything. I know I'm not the only one to think this, but there were some jarring and anachronistic words used that booted me right out of my suspension of disbelief. And I noticed this quite a bit with Wayne in The Lost Metal, where I went, I'm gonna have to kick you out, sir. Where I kind of went, wow, that's a lot raunchier than I usually expect from Sanderson, and it just kind of got worse in Wind and Truth. One of the things I historically loved about Sanderson was the lack of overt swearing and spice. If you are familiar with the Cosmere, you may be familiar with the term Sanderlanche. This is the part of the book where all of the puzzle pieces start falling together, and it's basically where you have to buckle in, cozy up, and abandon everything else while you are trying to get to the end of this book, if you're the kind of reader that I am. The Sanderlanche in Wind and Truth is 400 pages long. Let that sink in. Yes, the Sanderlanche typically takes up the last quarter to a third of the book anyway, but in a book that is 1,330 pages, 400-page Sanderlanche. I was grouchy at my poor family for an entire weekend because despite switching to audiobooks between Words of Radiance and Shadows of Self, I felt the need to actually read Wind and Truth, which meant I didn't have it on in the background while I was making dinner, while I was doing my day job, and I had to actually carve out reading time for it. And that's why, even with a head start from the preview chapters, it took me a fitting 10 days to finish it once it came out. Overall, my recommendation is to read it. I loved the things that it did well, and while I'm not thrilled about the things that it did that were just kind of I laughed, I cried, and now I'm staring down the long divide between now and Stormlight 6, which is supposed to be 7 years away, and I'm about to no-life the entire extant Cosmere, which is the equivalent length of Wheel of Time at this point, so that maybe I'm a legit content creator by the time it comes out. If you haven't read Wind and Truth yet, this is your cue to dip out, because we're about to get to spoilers in 3, 2, 1, let's jam. The word choices. Lift is not my favorite character, by any stretch of the imagination. I re-listened to Edgedancer as part of my Stormlight Archive revisit in advance of Wind and Truth, and then I listened to the whole Harry Potter series over again because I remembered why I hadn't listened to Edgedancer since Arcanum Unbounded came out in 2016. Specifically, though, Lift gets in an argument with the Tower about how they are both covered in / filled with smaller organisms that experience their entire life cycle there, with all the attendant consumption and waste production, and it just devolves into a series of fart jokes, which I'm not sure what else I expected from Lift. It just was not a great experience as part of the book for me. Beyond that, in terms of modern vernacular, you have things like straight up Civil War, and, oh yeah, he was an absolute tool, wasn't he? And this is coming from a girl who's currently a spear. I didn't like it. There was no reason for it. Other word choices would have been perfectly valid and fine and fit the scenes better, or at the very least, not knocked me right out of my immersion in the world. Next up, we have the token trans character, We know that the Azish have a well-recognized concept of trans people. Back in Oathbringer, when Drehy is courting a man, Sigil asks Kaladin when he's going to apply for social reassignment, and Kaladin's like, we don't do that here. So I guess in the scope of LGBT, the Azish recognize the T without also recognizing the LGB. I am probably not the best person to offer commentary on this because this is not part of my lived experience. Reading it, I felt like this blacksmith was introduced. We were told their new pronouns. We see them another couple of times throughout the book. I didn't really feel a connection to them. It felt like they were just there to check a box without any meaningful representation. I don't know how meaningful representation would have been done in this book because there was so much else going on. It just felt like it was in the way of Dumbledore was gay all along, and it just didn't really sit well with me. Speaking of LGBT representation, Rlain and Renarin are adorable, and I love them. Speaking of romance and romantic subplots, I hate that Shallan is pregnant. And it's not because I hate mothers. I'm a mother. And I may hate myself sometimes, but it's not because I'm a mother, unless I feel like I'm doing a particularly bad job that day. No, I hate a book concluding with a woman finding out she's pregnant, regardless of whether it's a joyful epilogue with her husband, or in this case, being trapped in the storming cognitive realm with no way to get home. And we know that there's a gap of 15 to 20 years between Stormlight 1 through 5 and Stormlight 6 through 10, and I hate this kind of time gap because suddenly there's teenagers, and suddenly I'm supposed to care. I'm looking at you, Dune Messiah. And I knew this was coming. I knew it was coming from the Chapter 16 throwback to the Oathbringer no mating scene, and I can be satisfied with being right while also hating the entire situation. Seriously, the whole pregnant in the epilogue trope was my least favorite thing that I had to write as a ghostwriter for Regency romances. I think it's because I'm afraid that she's going to be related to only a mother character, or perhaps just a placeholder for healing generational trauma, because, she killed her mother, the Herald Chana, on the night of the treaty in the prologue. There's so much more that Shallan can be, and I really, really hope that she's not just a mother in the back half of the Stormlight Archive. Szeth. I appreciate that we get the story of how he became the person that he is today, and that we find out he eventually gets married. But I have this thing about people and their pets, and yes, I'm one of those women who watches true crime documentaries, and I've done a lot of research into World War I and the conditions in the trenches, and I didn't bat an eye at the gratuitous descriptions of blood and violence and gore in J. Kristoff's Empire of the Vampire and Empire of the Damned. If it is something that gets to me, it is when, 1, someone sees somebody eating their pet, or 2, somebody is unknowingly fed their own pet. That gives me visceral horror. And Sanderson did this to me in this book. And every time that little wool toy was shown or referenced for the rest of the book, it took me back to that flashback. And I'm not okay. And the last thing I hated, Moash. F***ing with a shard blade. Dude, there's so many points against him. As a parent, it's enough for me that he cut down Elhokar while he was holding Gavinor in his arms. And then you have Teft, and you have him trying to convince Kaladin to off himself, and then there was Leighton and the stupid Bridge 4 before he takes off into the sky, just... I can't even root for a redemption arc at this point, because he's been given chances to make different decisions, and he just keeps being a shitty person. I can't handle it. Kaladin Stormblessed, this man and the journey that he went on, finally getting to the 5th ideal of the Windrunners and accepting that you can't pour from an empty pitcher, and sometimes you have to take care of yourself in order to take care of other people. I was expecting him not to make it out of this book based on the parallels that his story and the story of Fleet that Hoid was telling were overlapping. I was hoping that he didn't make the heroic sacrifice, because we all know the Storming Bridge Boy would have no problem laying down his life for somebody else. But one of my favorite quotes from Stargate SG-1 is when the team leader is dragging a person away from making that sacrifice, and tells them that the hardest part of being on a team isn't laying down your life for somebody else, it's watching your friends do that for you. Don't ask me who I would have had make that sacrifice for Kaladin. I don't know, but it could have gone that different direction and might have added a little bit more depth and nuance to the ideals of the Windrunners. Also, side note, the Herald's minds being separated off to another place while their bodies are being tortured reminds me of that scene where Gaius Baltar is getting tortured in BSG.
Only your mind is there.
Which, admittedly, a little bit different. Navani. She may just be my favorite Cosmere character at this point. Did she unlock a new and dangerous form of magic? Absolutely! So did Vasher, and I love him too. She also discovered the means by which the fused can be permanently destroyed and sang to the rhythm of war with one of her enemies. Journey before destination, you bastard, may just be one of my favorite lines in all of the Stormlight archive. She doesn't so much have a character arc as we are consistently revealing new layers to the depth of her loyalty, intellect, and resilience. She trusts Dalinar enough to make it out of the spiritual realm on his own that she takes an opportunity when she sees it to get herself out and rescue the child that's with them. And the thing about having characters like Jasnah who subvert gender roles by going into battle with a sword and commanding armies and leading nations is that you have to have gender roles in the first place and characters that fulfill them, and Navani is that 100%. Adolin, every time he was on the page, I was basically making the grimace emoji face because I didn't want anything to happen to him, and then things happened to him, and he still saved the day anyway. But I loved Adolin's interaction with the Azish military leaders and with Yonaghan, and the final defense of the Azish throne room with all of the Deadeye Spren that Maya guided back through the cognitive realm was freaking fantastic, and leading to the Kingdom of Azamir being the last nation on Roshar experiencing the light of day was a fantastic use of the in-world mechanics. I'll be perfectly honest, I enjoyed this book mostly for what it did in the scope of the greater Cosmere. I know that if I were a more casual reader and didn't make knowledge of the Cosmere a core pillar of my identity, I wouldn't have enjoyed it as much. Don't get me wrong, it's a fine book on its own. It is epic in scope and it absolutely sticks the landing of this 5-book arc, but a massive portion of my enjoyment from it comes from the fact that it is building upon all of the Cosmere history that came before it. Brandon has said that the gloves are officially off when it comes to Easter eggs and crossovers, and I couldn't be happier because this means we're going to start getting some of those Avengers Assemble moments that have been 20 years in the making at this point. Knowing what else is going on behind the scenes in the Cosmere and having the nods to the couple of the secret projects at the end was just love it. This book did things I didn't love, and I still love the whole, and maybe I'll have a bigger following by the time Stormlight 6 comes out. In the meantime, please do all those delicious things that feed the almighty algorithm, like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!